By the way, I said 371 in the last video. That was a class I used to teach. This is 373. This is English 373, week 5, part 2. So I just think it really is one of the most important things about Shakespeare, that when he has a thought, when he has a theme or an idea, such as masculinity or whatever, it shows up on every page. I just think that's really cool. Okay, so let's wrap this up now. I think it's time to talk about the two final these two little details. So for starters, I'm gonna grab a tiny line from the most boring part of Macbeth. It is almost always cut out of movies and stage productions, and it should be, because it's a goddamn snooze. On our copy, I'm on page 18. It's just a terrible part of the play. I hate it. I just hate it so much, and everybody hates it. It's basically, that Macduff runs away and his whole family gets slaughtered. But before he finds out about that, he runs away to England and joins Malcolm for the rebellion. And basically, he meets Malcolm and is like, Malcolm, you're supposed to be king. And Malcolm says to him, man, I'm going to be a terrible king. I'm going to rape all the women and steal all the gold and slaughter people. And then Macduff is like, oh, this is terrible. Our whole country you were supposed to be our savior. If you're just as bad as Macbeth, then we're all is lost. And then Malcolm goes, ha ha, I was only kidding. I was just testing you to see if you were a good man. I'm none of those things. I'm actually really nice. I think people in Shakespeare's day might have found it more interesting than we would, because it's a kind of debate about what it takes to make a good king and how dangerous it is to have a bad king. And since we don't have kings anymore, it's not the best. It just doesn't resonate with modern audiences in a way, and it's just pretty slow. It's like a philosophical conversation about the qualities that a good king should have, and how dangerous it is when a king doesn't have those qualities. But since we don't live under a monarchy, it doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't feel right. But there is a tiny detail in that scene, like just a couple of words that I want to jump on real quick. One of the things Malcolm says is he says, oh, I'm going to rape all the women when I'm king. And then he says, ha ha ha, I was only kidding. And when he's explaining that he was only kidding, he says, I'm not greedy, I'm not a bad guy, I'm not violent. And then he says this. Hey, zoom in. I am yet unknown to woman. I am yet unknown to woman. So he says, listen, I'm not a bad guy. I'm not going to rape a bunch of women. Actually, if I tell you the truth, I am yet unknown to women. Meaning he's a virgin. He's never had sex with a woman. It's a small detail. Nobody cares about it. We'll come back to it. The other part that I want to jump on is, of course, one of the most famous. That's a part of Macbeth that nobody even knows is there and nobody cares about, and why would they? The next part of Macbeth I want to jump to is another tiny phrase that everybody knows that we've actually already talked about, and it's one of the more famous parts of Macbeth, and that's the answer to the prophecy about Macduff. That Macduff is able, the witches tell Macbeth that no man of woman born can harm you. And so he's fighting Macduff, and he's like, hey, you were born of woman. Everyone was born. Every man has a mom. So you were born of woman. No man of woman born can harm me. He says, I lead a charmed life. Actually, I'm going to find the exact thing he says. Let thy keen sword impress. Oh, wait. Let fall thy blade on vulnerable crests. I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born. And Macduff says, despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. And then Macbeth goes, and then he stabs him. It's great. I really like the fight scene at the end of the movie. It's very, I don't know, it's cool. There's like fire burning in the background, and it's very ugly. It's a very ugly, rough fight scene. I think it's fucking cool. They use slow-mo to cover the fact that they don't have good choreography, but it still looks good. That's a little Hollywood trick. If your fight scene looks like shit, you just slow it down. You just do it in slow-mo and go, and it looks cool. Everybody likes it. It's cool. But Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped. This is, I know we talked about this already. I explained this already, but just to go over it again really quick. The idea is that normally a person is born. Now, in modern day society, if the baby is sort of stuck or turned the wrong way, it can be hard for the baby to be born. And in that kind of emergency situation, or semi-emergency, not as much, we're good at it now. But they cut into the mother and pull the baby out, so that the baby doesn't go through the birth canal. It's cut out of the mother. Now, of course, if lots of C-sections are pretty common. I mean, some of my closest friends have had C-sections. My sister. It's a very standard sort of procedure when the baby is sort of turned the wrong way. and isn't sort of coming out the traditional way. I don't know how to put that. Um, so the doctors will sort of remove the child from the womb. Now, of course, you still say the baby was born on this date, and the baby still has a birthday and all that stuff because we consider that to be, the baby was born, whatever. I know it didn't pass through the birth canal or whatever, but the baby's born. But for the witches with their tricky speech, it's like technically speaking, the baby was never born because the baby was cut out of the mother before it was born. And so that's the answer to the prophecy: is Macduff is of no woman born, because he was pulled out of his mother before he was born, and so technically speaking, he was never born at all. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that because I think there's more going on here. I mentioned infant mortality in an earlier post when I was talking about Lady Macbeth's dead child. Um, but it's worth pointing out that, remember, it's hard to believe, but knowledge about germs really only started to become widespread in like the 1920s. It's like 1910, you're starting to get germ theory. Prior to 1910, people didn't really know what germs were because they didn't have microscopes and it was like too hard to see. You couldn't really see them, they didn't really understand them. So the idea of germs is like relatively recent. So if you go back to Shakespeare's day, which is 400 years before ours, they definitely don't know about germs. You hop back to Macbeth's day in the year 1200, that's nearly 1,000 years ago. They definitely don't know about germs. They definitely don't know about soap. Um, and so the thing to picture here is that imagine a birth that goes well. The way it works in 1200, as I think probably 1600 too, but the way it works in 1200 is that you've got a mother who's having a baby, and the father's not in the room, and they don't have a doctor. Births are handled by a midwife. A midwife is like a kind of nurse doctor figure who is supposed to help babies be born. So because on the idea that it's sort of woman's work and that someone shouldn't be seeing a woman's private parts or whatever, and so the midwives were traditionally women. So if the birth is going well, what you have in that situation is the mother giving birth, woman, and the midwife, also a woman, helping with the birth. And then the baby is born, and the two women bring it out and present it to the father. That's sort of the traditional birth in 1200. If something goes wrong and the baby is stuck, then you have to call a surgeon. It probably will not surprise you that surgeons in the year 1200, as they would have been in the year 1900, are all men. They're all men. So that's not going to be a shock to you that when they call the surgeon to kind of perform the operation to do the C-section, they're all men. But it's also worth remembering what percentage of women in the year 1200 survived the C-section operation. This is where they sort of cut into the woman and pull the baby out. What percentage of women survive a C-section in the year 1200? It's basically zero. It's zero. Like if the baby is stuck and they have to do a C-section, like nowadays they do a C-section in a hospital and the mother basically always lives. It's not life-threatening. We got it because we know what germs are, and But like in the year 1200, nobody lived. If they have to cut into your sort of stomach area and pull, is it stomach? Probably obviously lower in your stomach, but I don't know what to call the area where they make the cut because I actually don't know anything about surgery. But if they're cutting into a woman to pull the baby out, she's not surviving that. That's not going to happen. In which case, the scenario for the birth is very different in the case of a C-section baby. In the case of a birth that goes well, you have a mother, a woman, and a midwife, also a woman, presenting a baby to the father. But if you have to call a surgeon and have a C-section, then the midwife is sent away because women are not allowed to do surgery. The mother dies, in which case the only people left at the end of this procedure are the doctor, a man, and the baby, in Macduff's case, also a boy baby. So do you see this? So do you see this is like Macduff and I'm gonna wait till the next video to explain this. But basically, my point is that Macduff and Malcolm is unknown to woman, and Macduff is of no woman born. The two heroes at the end of this play are very disconnected from women. And this has been a play that's largely been about women and relationships between men and women. So it's interesting and kind of disturbing. And I'll talk more about why in a second.